Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's doing all right today. We will get started presently. We are going to be talking today about admin, uh, how to manage your admin permissions inside of Gravity. Um, we're going to use a specific example of budgeting suite. So, how are we going to make sure we're using the correct permissions for using the budgeting templates? So, we're going to walk through not only how to do it in terms of like, I'll show you how to set up users, how to add the groups, manage the permissions, but then also use some real examples to ensure that you only the people you want to be inside of these budgeting templates or doing accomplishing certain tasks have that access. Nick Lagua is in the chat today. If you have any questions, he will be taking care of the chat and Q&A. Of course, I will be checking up on the chat in case there's anything you folks want me to demonstrate again. And feel free if you have any specific examples that you would like to talk about to ask Nick, and I can either show you what's exactly going on or help you out in any other way. So today we're going to be covering two major themes regarding permissions and managing the permissions inside of Gravity. The first part that we're going to cover is the users, groups, and permissions. So at a high level, what I like to say is this is what you can see and who can see what. These are going to set up big permissions for the entire environment or for entire setups. The workflow is going to zoom in even more. So we're going to start with users, groups, and permissions, and then get moving on with the workflow. So, as I said, the users, groups, and permissions really shows what report you can work in, or really what even you can see in some instances. Whereas the workflows individuate what departments you can see and work in, what documents you could see and work in. So this is a very crucial distinction between the users, groups, and permissions and the workflows. Of course, the workflows also show the natural progression of work, say from data entry to under review to done. But what we're looking at is how can we effectively manage these permissions in Gravity so that we can ensure we're looking at the correct data, that the correct people are looking at the correct data at any point. Going further, as I said before, these users define who can work in Gravity. So this is like your individual people, department heads, department analysts, and also you. But the group functionality, which we're going to get into right away, helps automate this. So let's start at the very basics. How can we actually get users into Gravity? There are a few ways of doing this. Technically, there's only really one way, but some of you here might have a second option. And I'm going to demonstrate how we're going to be able to do this and what the difference is. So I'm going to hop in here to our webinar environment here. And we see here, we're going to be managing today and setting up the specific permissions for the City of Gravity budgeting. Now, as most of you will know, we have all of our user settings in the top right-hand gearbox icon. If we click on this gear icon and go to users, we immediately are brought to the users menu, where we can see how many users we have and also what groups we have. Let's start with adding a new user. If we wanted to add a new user to Gravity, most of you will have this button here that will say plus Gravity user. This is how most all of you will have access to, will be able to add new people to Gravity. Some of you, in some rare exceptions, will have another button here that says plus application user. In general, you're only going to be adding people through this Gravity user unless implementation unless implementation is said to use the application user. And so, Julie, real quick, this is an awesome question. It's super great. I'll just take this one quick, Nick. A report would be your budget book. A document would be the summary of general fund, for instance. Sometimes they'll call them object in Gravity. I prefer to use document because that makes a little bit more sense. Like your GFOA award would be a document within a budget book, whereas your budget book is the report. I hope that clarifies things for you there, Julie. So to add a user to Gravity, we just click on this button here, plus Gravity user. You're going to want to enter in their email address. So I'm going to enter my new ClearGov email address in here because I don't think I'm in here yet. And then we would click on, we would add a login. This could be any login you want. In general, what we will do is we will take what comes before the @ sign in your email. So implementation will do this. They'll take what comes before the @ sign and just paste it into login. This just makes it a little easier to log into Gravity. And add our first name and last name. Now, this option here that's checked off with the little pink check mark here that says send an email invitation for the user to set their password. This is on by default because most of you are going to be accessing Gravity from a Google page, meaning that you're going to essentially have a Google account that accesses Gravity. If it's the case that you are using an SSO, so a single sign-on system, you might not need to click this button on or off. This is also something to check with implementation if there's ever any confusion that's going on here. I'm going to click this on because otherwise we have to set their password for them. Now, if you are adding a lot of users into your system, we can click here in this box on the bottom left that says create another to add multiple users one after another. So if I clicked create user, this same dialog box would come up again. I'm going to uncheck this and I'm going to click create user. Now I know what's going to happen next, and this is going to be something that's important for you folks to know about creating users in Gravity. So I click create user and you're going to see in the top right, is it going to, oh, actually I was able to add my ClearGov. They must have allowed it in here. Now, one thing to know about adding users to your Gravity environment. In general, you are going to be unable to add anybody else other than any email address that is not your institution's email address. So let's pretend you're, I'm trying to think of a good city. Let's say New York City. The New York City email would be the only one you can input to Gravity. If it's ever the case, so let's pretend you're working in your budget book, your budgeting, and you want your school, a budget analyst from a school district, or you want a budget analyst from another internal organization that has a different email address than your main organization, you have to contact support to allow them, to tell them to allow that new email address. What this does is it's essentially a layer of security on top of your Gravity environment. This means I couldn't just go and add a Hotmail account or another city's account by accident and thereby grant somebody permission to your Gravity environment. So if there's ever the case that you get an error up here that says something along the lines of invalid domain, contact support to have them enable to what they call whitelist this domain so that you can add that user to Gravity. Adding a Gravity user is super simple. You will be limited on the amount of licenses you have, but this will be agreed upon in the contract that you have with Gravity. So if there's any questions at any point, feel free to ask Nick. But what I'm going to show us now and move on to is how do we move now from, we've added our users. Oh, and I'll talk about deactivating users right away. We've added our users, but how do we actually automate this? So let me go back real quick and just show you something about managing users. So let's say John Evian here got added to Gravity, worked here for 1 year, and then left. What we could do, if you don't anticipate this individual coming back to coming back to work in your Gravity environment rather, you're going to want to click on this deactivate button. And deactivating the user will remove all their permissions. Once we click OK, This means that you will open up a license to using Gravity. So if somebody retires, if somebody moves to a different team, I'd recommend deactivating their account so that you can have somebody new join your Gravity environment. You will see here that we have a delete button. I have a delete button because I'm in an admin account. I'm using the support email address here. You are not going to have access to this delete button. You will only have access to the activate and the deactivate button. Now let's pretend they hired John back on to work again in his Gravity environment. We can click activate, and this will immediately bring back his email address, immediately give him access to log back into Gravity. But we remember he now has no permissions because we deactivated him. What we're going to cover next is how to automate permissions in a useful way. And I'm going to use the example of, let's say the library at the City of Gravity does its own budgeting and they enter in everything through here to the City of Gravity. So what we recommend doing is to create groups based on your departments that you have entering in data. The reason for this is if you set up the group permissions, it means that every single user in that group will have a bare minimum permission. Thus, if they retire or if they switch departments in any case, all you have to do is move them from one group to another group to have them automatically get their permissions back. So I'm going to click on groups here and I'm going to create a new group, the library team. So this is going to be the team of people that are going to enter in the budgeting items for the library at the City of Gravity. So I'm going to click this create new group button. I'm going to name it library department. And in the comment, I'm also going to put library department and click add. So we've created this new group. Now here we have a fair amount, and this is something I will talk a little bit about later regarding permissions, because it's crucial in a budgeting. So if you're using the O&M template to understand what these groups are, but I just want to demonstrate what a department group would look like, and then we'll look at some of the other groups. So here we are at the library department. What we want to do is add the users that we want here. So I'm going to add J. Evian, and I'm also going to add G. Hollander for fun. They both work at the library. So now they've already been added here, which means anytime that I give them access, as soon as I give them permissions to work in the budgeting templates through the groups, they'll automatically have access. And then if John here ever quits, all I have to do is click on this X to remove him from the group. And then immediately, because and this is important to note, the permissions in Gravity are added and removed instantly. So if I remove him, that means he would immediately now have no more permissions. And then vice versa, if John then came back, I added him, he would immediately have the permissions to work back in these O&M templates. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is managing the users and groups permissions for some, oh yeah, there we go. So, and as I said, and I just want to highlight this, the group functionality simplifies granting permissions and essentially automates it. We would really recommend that their best practice is to have a group for every department that is in the O&M templates, just so you always have correct access and you don't have to worry about making sure individual people have access. You just add them to and fro from the groups. Now let's hop over and talk about managing users and groups permissions. So I'm going to show you how to set these group permissions, and we'll see what that does in managing the user permissions. So I'm going to hop back to Gravity, and we're going to now set the library department permissions to access the O&M templates. So what I'm going to be demonstrating here is what I would say is the best permissions to give a departmental head who is just going into your budgeting templates and entering in their numbers. So you will see here we have two different types of permissions. We have the application level permission and the report level. The application level permissions are big permissions that will manage Gravity as a whole, so the entire product. So we have here the setting to manage users. So if I click this button on, now both G Hollander and J Evian would be able to instantaneously manage users. And as you see, all I have to do is click on these buttons to have things get added. And if I click on an indented permission, immediately all the permissions are added. So it's very simple to add permissions to and fro from users, or from groups and users. But the application level is where you're probably not going to be doing the most of your work. You're going to be doing it at the report level. So let's click on report level and click select group. We're going to go down to the library department. And now we have to select which section and or group we're going to work in. So I'm going to go to City of Gravity Budgeting, aka we only want the library department to be inside of the budgeting templates. We don't need them in the budget book and we don't need them in the ACFR. This means that if we were to ever have the library department work in the ACFR, we would have to go and select the ACFR and then give them the same permissions. Now, what I would recommend for any single department, so if you're using this webinar to set up your permissions or get an idea of how to set up your budgeting permissions, what you're going to want to have every department have access to is, when your O&M budgeting templates, this open permission. This allows them to see and access the O&M template section. This open one is crucial so they can even get into the report. You might be asking, John, we would like to have, what do all these permissions do? We see there's a lot. In the follow-up email to this webinar, I will be providing you with a list that, that will delineate what every single permission does. So at this point, we don't need to mention it, but what I would say, the first one is this open permission to let them have access, and then the move workflow step. For entering in data in the O&M templates, there's not much more that they need at the report level. They need to be able to open the report and access the O&M templates, and then they also need to be able to move the workflow step, which we'll talk about a bit later on today. Moving the workflow step, this permission will allow them to go from data entry to review, for instance, or maybe they're going from to do to in progress, something like that. But this, I would say here, giving them this open permission and move workflow step are the minimum permissions you would need for anybody doing data entry in the O&M templates. You're not going to want them really doing anything else here. So that's what I would say is your bare minimum permissions. As I said, I will be sending out a guide that will delineate what every single permission here enables. But at the bare minimum, open and move workflow step. This will allow them to get into the report and say whether something is complete or not. So we've given, if we go back to the library department, we've given G Hollander and J Evian some budgeting permissions in the application view and some report level views. I want to show you what this does to the individual users. So we just saw that I just created J Evian. So I'm going to go to select users, J Evian, and if I scroll down, you're going to see here that John has all of these permissions grayed out, but they're enabled. The groups, and this is a good way to, if it's maybe a little, if this helps out, I find this to be a really good way of remembering this. Groups create the bare minimum permissions that this user can have. So let's pretend that, okay, you know what, John's pretty important. We want him to be able to manage the users and the workflows. We can always add permissions above and beyond what the group level does, but it's important to know that the groups set the minimum permissions that a user can use. Now let's go check out the report level. So I'm going to go back to J Evian. and we're going to go to the city gravity budgeting, and we see that Jay Evian could open the report. Great. And we can see he can move the workflow step. Let's go and check out the ACFR. Jay Evian here has no permissions in the ACFR, first off, because the group that we set up did not enable anything, any permissions in the ACFR. So if we wanted Jay Evian to be able to open the ACFR, print preview, maybe create a snapshot, and move the workflow step, we can give him individual permissions. You might be asking, okay, John, we could add this for every user, so why would we use the groups? So some clients of ours who will use the budgeting suite will have up to 100 users inside of their environment. I doubt you're probably going to want to do this for up to 100 people. The groups are the best way of doing this and saving you time. So we've been able so far to add and deactivate new users. We've been able to create the library team, and we understand why groups are important. And we've also learned how to manage users and group permissions. We're now going to move on and talk about the workflows. As I said, the workflows will allow you to delineate exactly what documents, so which departments they're able to see inside of the O&M templates. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat or the Q&A. Nick Langlois will answer anything that you have there. So moving on to the workflows. The workflows, as I said, will help you control exactly what documents and or objects that they will be able to see. And this is going to be crucial for using the budgeting suite in Gravity. Now, why would I say that? The main thing being is you're probably not going to want every single department to see every single other department's finances. So there's a couple things that the workflows do. First off, as you can imagine from the name workflow, it will say what stage work is at. But it also provides you with some sort of permissions. So for example, the library team, as we're using today, needs to upload and edit their files without seeing anything else in the report. Workflows are also highly useful for using the personnel templates, because obviously personnel data is highly sensitive in some cases. So you're not going to want anybody to just access that data. So you're going to want to put it behind a workflow. Additionally, and this is something that maybe those of you who are have an ACFR with Gravity would want to know. If your auditors are in Gravity, you might want to use a workflow, modify your ACFR workflow to give them view-only permissions. This means, and I'll show you exactly where to do this, but this will mean that any time that your reviewers are in Gravity, they will not be able to edit any documents. They will not be able to even comment on any of the documents, but they'll be able to see what's happening in the ACFR. One thing that's important to note about the workflows is that they move between stages. So here we have data entry to review to complete. This is what I would say is a pretty solid workflow for budgeting, use in the budgeting suite. Could also be used in an ACFR or a budget book, whatever works best for you folks, wherever you are. But there's also the added notion that there's a path that the work takes. So we see here data entry goes into review, goes into complete. In this case, this is the only path that work can take, or a document could take inside of your report. I'll be showing you how to add, I guess maybe the technical term would be a circuit. So if there's something in review that needs to get edited, so somebody submits some numbers, you say, okay, you actually need to go back and review this, how to add that sort of mechanism back in. But as it stands, generally you're going to want something that goes from data entry to review to complete, and we're going to be editing the permissions at data entry, review, and complete. So let's get into editing a workflow, and we're going to create one from scratch so you can see the entirety of the workflow canvas at play. So I'm going to go back here to Gravity. So the workflows are accessible also through the settings. So if I click on this gear icon up here and click on workflows, we now are in the workflow menu. Now, right now we only have this one workflow here, so we're going to create one from scratch. I'm going to click here on this blue plus sign in the bottom right-hand corner, and let's call this library department budgeting. And I'm just going to copy this and paste this down here. But we could add something different to the description, but we need to add a name and a description to create our new workflow. And then we're going to click Save. Now, immediately we see that it's red. This is because the workflow hasn't been configured yet, and we're going to configure it shortly. So we're going to get right to that and edit this workflow. But when we return, we're going to return to this menu to learn about copying the workflows. So if you're starting from scratch and or you want to change the way your permissions are, this copy button is going to be invaluable. So I'm going to go here to this right arrow that is edit stages and click on that and library department budgeting. And now we've arrived here at what I like to call the workflow canvas. So I'm going to want to create a workflow. Here at the City of Gravity, we like to do our data entry, review, and then complete. But I'm going to want to be able to push stuff back to data entry if there's anything incorrect. So let's start. And let's say we're going to add status here. So this is going to be our first step in our workflow. I'm going to say data entry. And we can change the color of the steps if you want, up to you. It doesn't change how it works, but it will change what the pie chart in the report summary will do. So here we're just going to name the step, but what's of utmost importance is the rules. I'm going to click on rules here, and we have 3 different types of permissions we see. We have edit permissions, suggest permissions, and view permissions. View permissions, as you can assume, means that they can only see the document. Suggest means that they can see and comment on the documents. Edit permissions means that these users or groups can go in and edit this document. So at the data entry step, I'm going to want to make sure that the library department can definitely edit this. And I'm going to add IGM support as a user. This is always a good case, just so, and I'll explain why shortly. But let's say also, so we had one individual user, but we also want our admin team to be able to edit this at any point. So you might want to know, you might be asking, okay, why are we adding IGM support as a user? The reason for this is workflows work in an opt-in manner. What that means is if I removed IGM support, the account I'm currently using in Gravity, if I removed it from this workflow, it would mean that whatever document, O&M template, anything is assigned to this workflow would be completely invisible to me. So I'm going to add IGM support here so we can actually see it. And this is where and why it's so powerful, these workflows. Since they are opt-in, any of these users or any of these groups that are not here will be unable to see any document assigned here. So I hope that's clear. If there's any explanation needed for this opt-in metric, let me know. Now, I have one quick question for you folks. Does anybody here want to receive more emails? You could just let us know in the chat. Would you like to receive more emails on a daily basis? I'm going to assume the answer is no. And this, you don't necessarily have to use this, but if there's ever the case that you are using Gravity's automated notifications and you don't want to receive anything, you can add your email to this blacklist. Right now, it's not really necessary to do that in any way, but just so you're aware. So once we've added the title and who can edit, suggest, and or view this, we're going to click add. Now I'm going to add our review step. So I'm going to click add status, name, I'm going to say review. The rules, I'm going to want the admin group to be able to edit it. And I'm going to want IGM support to be able to edit it, or else it's going to be invisible to them. But I don't think the library department should be able to edit it when it's in review. They've submitted it for review. So they're going to only have view permissions. This, of course, will depend on how you want your department heads or department analysts to work in Gravity. But we consider it best practice that after the data has been submitted in the review process, that you only give the department's view permissions. You want them to be able to see the numbers. So in the case that, let's say, department request, and then the finance department makes amendments, you want the department to be able to see that. So they need view permissions to be able to see that. And I'm going to click add. And I'm going to click and drag review over here. And let's add the done step. So I'm going to go add status. I'm going to click here and I'm going to say complete. I'm going to change the color just so it's not the same color as the review. I'm going to click rule. When we're complete, we don't want anyone touching these numbers. So what I'm going to do is go to view, and I only want people to really have view access here. I'm going to add admin here. And then I'm also going to add the library department here. And I'm also even going to add IGM support to view. Of course, you can always change this up, and it depends on what you exactly want, because now if this O&M template was ever moved to complete, nobody would be able to edit it, but everybody would be able to see it. Now, this depends, as I said, what you want. We recommend this just so in the off chance that things have been completed, you've locked down your numbers. You probably don't want someone to accidentally go in and change the numbers. So I'm going to click view here and only add view permissions and click add. And now we have data entry to review to complete. So we've set up the stages in our workflow. The next thing we're going to want to do is show the path of work that we can take in this O&M workflow. So all we have to do to connect these stages together is click on these purple circles and just click and drag. Now, having done this, you're going to see that we move from data entry to review to complete. This is the only path that work can take inside of this workflow. But let's pretend that occasionally the admin team said, okay, your numbers, we want you to make sure you revisit the numbers or make sure you've added the correct numbers. What we could do is if we want to be able to push stuff back to data entry, we have to ensure that we have this arrow here going back from review to data entry. If we do not have this, we would have to enable the library team to edit in review, which might not be ideal. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask Nick. But the next thing we're going to do is what I would say is a crucial component in maintaining, if you're, especially for the budgeting suite, maintaining that nobody can move data to another part of the workflow that it isn't ready to be moved to. So let's pretend, for argument's sake, the library team has entered in all their data and they've pushed it to review. You probably don't want the library team, who in the review stage only has view permissions, to be able to say, oh, you know what, I want to go back and enter some more data and punt it back to data entry. You probably want to restrict that. As well, you probably don't want the library team to say, okay, yeah, this looks good, and then push it to complete, and then nobody's able to edit it. So what we're going to do is restrict who can move what permissions can move the work from review to data entry and review to complete. So to do so, I'm going to double click on this arrow between review and data entry. If you want, we can change the color and name, but that's not really important here. What's important is the conditions. I'm going to go and click on conditions. And we have here, it says disabled for users with view permissions at source. I'm going to click that on and click apply. What that means is the library team who has view permissions in review would not be able to say, oh, I want to go back and enter more data and push it back to data entry. And we're going to do the same thing for this one between review and complete. I only want admin to be able to say, I want this data is complete. We're locking down the numbers. So I'm going to go to conditions and go to disabled for users with view permissions at source. This means that at any point, if the library team were to go in, and they would not be able to push anything that's in review to complete. Now, before I move on and click apply, I want to show you one other component of the transitions that might be useful to you at some points. There is this button here called triggers, where we can actually, and this is very rarely used, but if it was ever the case that you're on a tight deadline or at a certain point of your workflow, you want somebody to get an email that a document has entered the review queue, you can actually click here and say email users at destination step, meaning that anybody who has any sort of permissions at that next step would get an email about it saying it's entered that completed status. I've only had some clients ever want to use this in the case that they're, really tight on time and they really want to know when stuff is submitted. There's also a couple other permissions here, submit to data store or confirmation process. If you want to use this confirmation process, which in short is when something is moved forward in the workflow, somebody actually has to approve it. You're probably going to want to have to talk to implementation to make sure that things are configured properly. If you want to use some sort of more advanced approval process. Now I'm just going to click apply. And now here, anybody who has view permissions at review cannot push it back to data entry, nor can they move it to complete. This essentially secures that only our admin team will be able to say when work needs to be to have more work done or when the financials are locked down. If there's any questions whatsoever, please feel free to ask Nick in the chat. The very last thing we have to do to create our new workflow is select the endpoints. The AKA, when does the workflow start and where does it end? I'm going to click select endpoints, and I'm going to say our first step is data entry, and our last step is complete. Great, save. And you're going to see up here, if you notice, there's now a green dot here. This means that this workflow is valid and ready to be used. And a note of caution, workflows are one of the few things in Gravity you have to click save on. Most everything else, you don't have to click save, but you have to click save for a workflow. Had I not clicked saved and then clicked out, I would have had to redo every single thing in this workflow. So just note of caution, make sure you always click save after working on a workflow, and you're not going to have to redo your work. Great. We've been able to set up the library department budgeting, but we also want to set up Park and Rec really quickly. So what we're going to do is click on this back arrow, and we really like how the library budgeting workflow is working. So I'm going to click here on this copy button, and we're going to say Parks and Rec, and I'm just going to put this down here and save. And immediately we've copied the workflow from Parks and Rec, from library to Parks and Rec. The only thing we have to do at this point is go back to the edit stages and make sure that we remove the library team and add the Park and Rec, which we don't have currently, to this group. So I'm just going to remove the library team from these steps, just so in this case, they would be unable, so the library team then would be unable to see what's going on here. So we've removed the library team from this, and now we have a new Parks and Rec department budgeting template ready to go. Click save. Great. Now what we're going to do next is apply these workflows to our report. So I'm going to open up the City of Gravity budgeting. And I'm going to click open. And now we see here we have our library and we have our Parks and Recs department. What we're going to have to do, and this is important for every workflow that you want individuated permissions for, you're going to have to apply a workflow to that O&M template. So I'm going to click here on these three dots to begin changing the workflow to the library services O&M template and click on properties. So currently we're working with the City of Gravity workflow, but I only want the library team to be able to see this. So I'm going to click library department budgeting, click on that and click save. Now what this would mean, and you'll see automatically our pie chart is updated saying now our new library workflow has been added up here. This would immediately mean that if somebody had been working in the O&M template who did not have permissions in the new workflow, they would automatically be kicked out. This is an important thing to remember, because the other thing being, if it's the case that you wanted this person to go back in there and they were not in the workflow, this would be completely invisible to them. Now I'm going to do the same to demonstrate this one more time. So we're going to change Park and Rec's O&M template to the Park and Rec workflow. I'm going to click here on the three dots, click properties, and go to the Park and Rec department budgeting, click save. And now we're going to see here, we have updated our pie chart. So now only the library team, if they were to log in, would be able to see this. And the Park and Recs, if we had added a group and added users to this group, automatically this Park and Rec team would only be able to see this. So we've covered how to edit the workflow and these rules and triggers. The rules and triggers were the view, edit, and suggest permissions, and also restricting people from moving something with view only permissions to the next step. So I have a couple best practices regarding the budgeting suite. Now, if anybody has any ACFR specific questions or any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer, and Nick would be more than happy to help. But the main reason why we're focusing on the budgeting suite is this is where you're going to have the most people working in Gravity at the same time. So what we would recommend is that each department or each fund, if you're budgeting by fund, should have its own group and its own workflow. Why do we want this? First, the group will allow you to sub users in and out very easily if you have a new department head or if you have different analysts going between different groups. The workflow will restrict who has access to these O&M templates. So that means that if we've added the library group to the library workflow, only the library team will have access to that library O&M template. And the same thing for the Parks and Recs. The workflow will also help with the submission of templates, mainly because they will have their own button. So they'll be able to click on the three dots, click on move workflow step and say review. And then it will immediately push that document to review. And then the library team would only have view permissions. So this is what we would say are the best practices for using the admin permissions in Gravity's budgeting suite. Of course, to meet your individual needs, you can change this, but we do think this is the best way to do it. This will always ensure that the correct users have correct access to the O&M templates. This could also be done for the CIP templates, could even be done for individual parts of the budget book. But this is what we think is usually the best way of configuring stuff. And it is, for those of you who are new clients to Gravity, this is also how all new budgeting suite clients are onboarded onto Gravity. So what we've been able to cover today is how to add users, how to manage groups, and how to assign permissions effectively. After we had accomplished that, we had looked at workflows and seen how we can build new workflows edit them so that we can ensure that only the correct people and the correct teams can see the documents they should be working in. After that, we had gone and added these workflows to these specific department O&M templates so that we know that only these departments can access them. Now that's all from me today, folks. We have a bit of time here for questions. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature. If there are any other questions regarding the budgeting suite and permissions, please let me know. Or if you have specific questions regarding the ACFR and permission sets there, I'm more than happy to ask. And as Nick has just said, we will be sending out an email shortly regarding February webinars. But that will be announced sometime in February as to what topics we're going to be covering and when. So I'll just stick around for a little bit and see if there's any questions. If you liked our webinar today, please feel free to either use the link that Nick has left in the chat or scan this QR code on your phone to let us know what you think of the webinar and whether or not you have any suggestions for future topics. So if there's any topics you think would be great for you to cover for us to cover in a webinar, please let us know. We love your feedback and we'd love to know if these webinars are helping you folks out. I'll just stick around for a second longer to see if there's any questions. And it's looking like right now there's not, but we'll just stick around for a bit longer. You're very welcome, Lauren. So I'll be sending out a follow-up email in the next couple of hours to everybody who registered for this webinar. So if there's any questions, you feel free to email us back when we send out this follow-up email or to submit any topics for future webinars using the webinar survey. And Elaine, yes, this will be posted to the Gravity YouTube channel. And I will be sending out a link with, I'll be sending out the link with the follow-up email. So you will always be able to access this. Exactly. You're very welcome, Steve. Have a great day. If there's any other questions, folks, please feel free to ask. I'll stick around just for another 60 seconds. And if there's nothing else, you can always email Nick or me, and we'll be able to help you set up your permissions aptly. So thanks everybody for attending. I hope everybody has a great day, and we will chat with each other at the next webinar. Bye, everybody.